Couple quick things while we're going through this. If you could, mute your phone, that's probably the best. We'll periodically stop at a screen like this for questions. At any time, we will allow you to unmute your phone if you want. Throughout the presentation, you can always use the chat box to ask questions, and we'll definitely take those at these stop points. If you got a burning question while we're going, go ahead and unmute your phone, and we'll go ahead and jump in. If not, we appreciate if we hold off to you see these pictures throughout the presentation. All right. So with that, I want to just kind of give you a little overview on H2O Degree and then get into really the technical side of what's motivating customers for doing submetering and rubs and everything like that. So H2O Degree has been around since the late 90s and reemerged again in 2007. Our focus historically has been on multifamily facilities, and we're starting to expand into the commercial space. Tenant submetering is the main area, and when we talk about submetering, this is for water, electric, gas, BTU, any type of utility being used within a multifamily property, we can provide metering for that, and we'll explain what we mean by submetering. The other area we focus a lot of effort on is leak detection and flood detection. So this is either leaks down the drain, such as your toilet, shower, sink, and ways to conserve water there by alarming and reports, as well as flood detection when it actually hits the floor. Now you got a catastrophic failure potential, and we'll talk about products to help with that. Third area is thermostat controls. How do you work within a property where the tenants need temperatures that they want, but we can also, as if you're an owner of a building, be able to control those temperatures within, a reasonable set points throughout the property, change those set points if there's vacancies in other areas. And then just overall, what I would call energy management, right? How do you look at your utility costs to lower them and improve your property? Today, really since 2007, you can see here over 115,000 meters of sensors throughout the United States, 50,000 plus apartments, and that's over 600 properties. Not quite in every state, but pretty much the major states throughout the country, over 40 of those. And what's interesting, the projects range from new construction, we do a ton there, and a ton in retrofit. And when we talk about retrofit, it might be HUD housing projects. It might be regular apartment buildings that, used to include water or electricity in the rent and now want to go submeter it. If you look at the types of properties we do, we're working with the large real estate investment trusts like Aimco, Avalon Bay, Graystar. You're working with some of your larger family-owned properties like LaFrac, universities, University of Southern Carolina. We've worked with a bunch of them in Texas, Yale University. So it really doesn't matter whether it's a small garden-style apartment or a big high-rise. We have technology that fits all those fields, and we'll kind of cover that as we go through the presentation. When we talk multifamily, we're not just talking market rate apartments. We're talking condos and co-ops that you would see in New York and Florida, those type of areas, mobile homes. We do a fair amount in student housing, both on campus as well as the independent housing developments that are around the campus environment. Low-income housing is a big target market for us. In that case, we're doing more about water conservation and thermostat control than billing, but also doing billing. Military is another growing market, as well as the hotel industry. And again, water, electric, gas, it really doesn't matter. We're responsible for all that. So what do we mean by submetering? The term submetering is sub of the utility meter. You got the utility meter coming into the building, doing the whole building. Now you're going to figure out, what do you do with it? How do I allocate costs? Do I just include it in rent? Really no motivation for, and the owner's paying all the bills. So how do we do that? How do we change that dynamic? So one area that a lot of companies have done in the past is done what we call RUBS, ratio utility billing systems. Some allocations, square footage, number of apartments, bedrooms. Flat bill, based on those allocations, really not a big motivator to conserve. You could be paying the same amount day in and day out, even if you're not there. So ultimately, what most properties are moving to is actually putting in meters to bill each tenant for the actual use, holding them accountable, and really creating that incentive to conserve. And that's truly what we see the market going to throughout the United States and Canada. The goal here is several facets, right? Obviously, you want to save water and electricity, no question about it. Be greener, be more efficient. But that also translates to dollars, and that's the driver here, right? How do we reduce operating expenses within properties? That is one of the key areas that we want to look for. And what we're trying to do is change two major behaviors. One is the tenant behavior. If you hold them accountable, they will conserve. Everyone knows that. It's no different than in your home. If you're being billed and you know that if you shut off the lights or turn off the water or take shorter showers, you'll save money, you'll do that. The other is trying to change behavior of property managers and the actual maintenance staff. Okay, let's give them reports showing there's leaks, showing where thermostats might not be working properly. Give them these notices, get them to be proactive in fixing them. All this works together to increase the facility's net operating income. That's their profitability. And people in real estate know if you can raise your net operating income, let's say you can save $10,000, $100,000 in your water bill over a course of a year through submetering or through leak detection. That increases your net operating income 100,000. The value of your property typically is based on net operating income, and in most markets, about 10 times that. That's about $100,000 savings, which ultimately increases the property value 10 times, which is $1 million in property valuation increase, which obviously can be used when you sell the building or want to refinance in some way. So these are the goals of our customers, right? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide tools and services that help achieve these various objectives. I want to show you real quick, what do we mean here, right? So the old way might have been just include utilities and rent. And now we're moving more towards submetering or a RUBS program. And in this presentation, we'll focus on the submetering, build attendance. So if you look at the very bottom, you got water coming from the utility through one master meter, right? Kind of a 3-inch, 5-inch meter for the whole building. Once it's in there, we're now going to go and have meters installed in each apartment. And they'll be collected from each apartment for their actual usage. Most owners use third-party billing companies, RBCs. We'll discuss that a little bit, but some will do it on their own. So again, we're going from a master meter for the whole building, and now we're installing sub-meters, sub of that master utility meter to bill each tenant for their usage. What we've seen historically on our own, let alone studies that have been done over the years, is huge savings when you move a building to submeter. Two studies done by the National Apartment Association and Multi-Housing Council showed in these reports anywhere from 18 to 39% savings. EPA did a study both for universities and also other properties and saw over 10% savings. And then NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research Development Authority, they did a study. It's a very cool study, really focused on electricity, but they took two buildings, about 10 stories each, 100 tenants in each building, two buildings, one next to each other, exact same building, submetered one for a year, then submetered the other, changed the policies, and they found in the submeter department, the savings per tenant were anywhere from 10 to 26%. So that's one of my favorite studies, very clean, very easy to understand. The one thing you want to think about with this submetering ability is what are the rules and regulations around it? There's really no federal statute, so it's each state and in some cases each county kind of making up their own rules. There's best practices and they look for some regulatory guidance, but there's nothing at a federal level. So a lot of times you're dealing with the municipalities, the public utility commissions, trying to figure out what's the best way. I think in general, if you had to say what is the overall rule, the overall rule is the landlords cannot make money or profit from submetering. the goal is to pass that cost on to the tenant. You might be able to recover some operating costs, such as billing fees and things like that, but ultimately, it's not a profit incentive device. Okay, that's left to the utilities to make their profit on the water electric distribution. Here, the landlords in general are not allowed to make a profit on the submeter. Commercially, that's a little different, but for residential, it's really a way that the industry said, I want to protect the tenants, and this is the rules that go there. What I mentioned before, there's this association called the UMCA, right? Utility Management and Conservation Association. This is a nonprofit organization. It's made up of all the leading meter reading companies, which we call RBCs, read, bill, and collect companies. It's made up of meter manufacturers such as ourselves and installers. And what the association does is really focuses on what are the rules by state for water, electric, gas, for submetering and RUBS. It's a great database for that. All the leading meter reading companies join, so they have access to that database. It does a lot of regulatory work if rules were changing or something to that effect. And then they do the comprehensive regulatory kind of watching what's going on in the industry and giving help and guidance to people that might be trying to change the rules, right? So if there's a utility looking to change to the latest regulation, they'll contact the UMCA and say, tell me what the states are doing. What are the different states doing for each of these different submeter and RUBS rules? So it's a great organization to keep in mind when you're looking at providers and really getting information. And again, it's all over the map for each one of these. Some allow submetering, some don't. Some allow RUBS, some don't. Different variations. And one thing you can see is kind of the general movement towards submetering in general, allowing it everywhere. And what you do is in these databases, you can see really specific of what each one of them are doing. And this is an example of Virginia. And one trend recently, back in 2016, California introduced Senate Bill 7. And in this bill, it literally said, starting January 1st, 2018, all new construction multifamily must submeter. Right? It's no longer included in rent, no longer dues and allocation. You must submeter. And the goal is to hold tenants accountable. You remember, California had horrific time with water usage and lack of water. And this is one of their main areas that they felt they could go and have an impact. Over 25% of the community in California lives in multifamily. And they said, look, they weren't being metered. It wasn't mandated, not like single family homes. And this was a key goal. And we're seeing this trend across the country. So with that, I want to just stop for a second. Feel free to unmute your phone if you have a question. We'll also check the chat feature. We had a question, can these savings be calculated for water only? And typically what we're finding for water only, I guess that was reference to the ones before that showed the different studies, water kind of falls right in there, right in that 15 to 20% savings from submetering. Overall, when you hold tenants accountable. So we've seen some of those studies were the ones from the NAA and multi-housing council were specific towards water, and they were in that 25% range. No one else has questions? We can keep going. And what I want to do, I just wanted to keep the screen on before to show you that I did get dressed, and my hair is not too bad considering having my wife cut it. But we'll go ahead and turn that off. I don't add a lot of value there. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead to, there is a question about, are these meters using remote readers? And without a doubt, that's kind of the next section. We'll talk about the meters and how they are read remotely through the computer. That's one of the key points of what makes submetering successful. All right. That we'll move on to the next section here. Don't worry about the words on here other than the left column. When people talk about, and we're going to focus on apartment buildings, from a plumbing standpoint, we'll start with water. From a plumbing standpoint, they're built three ways. The first we call single point of entry. And in that case, we're actually bringing in one cold water line into each apartment. Typically, there's a hot water heater in each apartment. We're going to feed the water into the hot water heater. And to the left and to the right, we're going to go to the toilet shower sink. That's called single point of entry. You only need 1 meter. Wonderful. The other way buildings are built are what's called a centrally heated water system. Maybe there's a boiler in the basement, we're heating in the water, and we're bringing 1 hot water line and 1 cold water line to each apartment. We call that dual point of entry. In that case, you need 2 meters. The third is what we call point of use. This again is a centrally heated system, but we have all the toilets on one riser, and we have the hot shower on one riser and the cold shower on the riser, and then a hot sink and a cold sink, and we might have the kitchen on another set. It's a little more complicated, and you need what we call point of use. We might put a meter on each toilet, shower, sink, hot and cold, to capture all the water. The point is, no matter how that building is built, there is a solution. Single point, dual point, point of use meter that can be done. Both retrofit and new construction. Yes, there's cost difference between them all, and it's ones that are more complicated than others. But the point is that if you want to go ahead and sub-meter your facility, there is a solution out there. The meters itself should never dictate how you bill someone or what construction you should use. You should use the most optimum construction there is from a engineering standpoint and from an ownership standpoint, and have the meters follow. And we'll kind of go into this a little bit deeper on the next slide. So when you do single point of entry, people typically think of a pulse output meter like this, whether it's a brass meter or these poly meters that are almost on the plastic side. All these meters can go into hot or cold, 1 pulse per gallon or 1 pulse for every 10 gallons, and be able to monitor the water single point, dual point of entry into each apartment. And the question before said, well, what about how do you read them? If you look on the right-hand side, the brass meter has a wire coming off of it. Every meter, just like you see here, have a wire, and that wire is a pulse output. So every time a gallon of water goes through there, it sends a pulse. That pulse gets tied into this black box at the bottom. We call this a 2-channel pulse counter. It can handle 2 meters, 1 water meter for cold water, 1 for hot. It could handle 1 water meter, 1 electric meter, or we have a single channel version. And this is pretty typical for all manufacturers, right? So once that pulse output wire is connected, that black box is now going to store the pulse counts and record them. So it's recording the consumption. In there is a wireless radio and a battery to operate it, because especially with water, it's not always easy finding an outlet, and we'd rather not do that. So it's a battery that lasts 10 years, which is pretty aggressive in the market. And this will transmit out the water usage every hour to a main base station. We'll have a graphic that shows that, but this is the device that gets you that pulse output wirelessly communicating through the property. So water meter right into a pulse output device back to a base station for collection of data. So that is what you would use for single point or dual point of entry. The next type is what we call point of use. And this is where we're looking at those risers. All the toilets on one riser, all the showers on another riser. Those meters that we just looked at, 3/4 inch meters, really don't work. Can't put that underneath a toilet or underneath the sink. If you look here in the center, you have this beige piece that gets screwed into the plumbing assembly for a toilet, shower, sink. And inside there is the white box, and we'll talk about that in a second, but that white box has a meter board and a wireless radio. So you can see on the right, this is attached to a toilet. This is monitoring just the toilet. Next one over on the right-hand side in the middle is for underneath the sink, measuring just the water for the sink. If you have a shower head, you either go behind the shower, have an access panel, but you don't always have an access panel behind the shower. In that case, you would have grabbed the hot and cold to the shower. If not, you can put the meter right behind the shower head, and it will record it. So this gives you that ability to meter each individual point where you can't get it easily with 1 or 2 meters. This same concept is what we'll talk about a little bit later also for leak detection. All right, this is called point of use. When you look at a property, single family, 1-bedroom type apartment, 40% of the usage is the toilet. The shower and tub, the 2 green ones, give you about another 40%. You're up to 80. Grab kitchen hot, you got another 5–10%. So even though a typical one-bedroom apartment really has 7 points to meter, the toilet, hot and cold shower, hot and cold bathroom sink for 2, and 2 more, which is 6 and 7, is hot and cold kitchen sink, might be a little overkill. Some markets, you have to meter everything. You're in the state of Delaware, you have to meter every point. We have apartments there that have 10 meters per apartment. But for the most part, a lot of the states say, as long as you meter what you're going to bill, and that's usually the way they go. 3 to 4 metering points, toilet, hot and cold shower, maybe kitchen hot. Those 4 points get you into the 90% range. And that's what we typically would see. So this is what we were talking about before the meter. You can see inside the white plastic piece is a meter board that's counting the water consumption, a battery, and there's also on that meter board is also the wireless radio. So again, you take the combination of the brass pulse output meter with our black box, that's doing the equivalent of this one device. So either one you can use. This meter can be used both for point of entry or point of use. You can see in this picture some more examples of where the meters get located, right behind the shower, underneath the toilet, same type of thing. Lots of security. You can see a little black clip there, so no one kind of messes with it, and to make sure it's installed properly. So now we're going to talk about the wireless side of this. How does that work? So in our world, with H2O Degree, we're using what's called LoRaWAN, long range wireless. It's a 900 megahertz. So you might have heard about 900 megahertz. Lots of companies use that. This is the latest in that wireless technology. We've been using it for over a year. We had another solution we used for over 15 years. But this one is really the latest, greatest out there in the marketplace, supported by a lot of big players like Comcast. Strong signal. And the key here is we can do a garden style apartment, have one single gateway, let's call it one black box in the property manager's office or in the clubhouse. And you can have these garden style buildings, 2–3 stories each, spread out on a 70-acre property with meters and pulse counters in each one. And we can be over about 1,000 feet away from that central location without repeaters. So very simple. Gateway in the middle of the building, of the property. Buildings can be 1,000 feet away, stick a meter in there, stick a pulse output device, and you're going 1,000 feet without repeaters. No other hardware required. In a high rise, we're doing a similar. We can do a 30-story high rise with one gateway, grabbing all 30 stories worth of meters. It's very impressive. If you compare it to some of the other wireless technology, you need repeaters every floor, every other floor, something to that effect. And that becomes a lot harder. And it's just more things to figure out, more failure points. So we've been very pleased with this solution. Today, we have over 5–6,000 of these devices throughout the U.S. Garden style high rises, lots of different types of buildings. It's about, I think we're up to over 60 properties at this point. And this is kind of the schematic to think about is if you think in a high rise, property manager's office is, say, in the basement, in the bottom left-hand corner, manager's office. That's where we put our gateway. And then in each apartment, we might have one hot meter, one cold meter going into a pulse counter. And that's what you see symbolized. And every one of those pulse counters is talking directly to that gateway. No repeaters, constantly talking down there. Once the data is in the gateway, it then goes out to the cloud through the internet. So you have one internet connection for the whole building. It goes out to the cloud. At that point, we are connected to the H2O Degree server. Data gets really cleaned up and looked at, and from there, it's then distributed back to the property manager for analysis, to the CFO if they want to look at it on the financial side, send it to a meter reading company for billing. We can send it to the property manager's maintenance staff. You can even give access to the tenants. We don't see that done a lot. That just adds questions, but that is available. So this is a typical setup, whether it's a high rise or garden style. All those metering devices wirelessly go back And the reason you need to do that is, to walk around and try to read each meter is impossible. Between errors and getting access into the apartment just won't work. There's good technology out there like LoRaWAN that allows you to read this remotely. Been being used for years and years wireless, and LoRaWAN, it really just takes it to the next level. If you think about some of the other technologies, they go about 100 feet in any direction, 200 feet, where this is 1,000 feet. So truly a much powerful system. And this again just shows you the parts. That's the gateway. That gateway is about 8 inches by 12 inches. Goes on the wall. It's got the devices inside there. You just bring internet and power to it. We prefer to be on the building's network, internet connection. We don't want a separate one. We know if the building's internet connection goes down for what they're working on or for checking fantasy football or Facebook, they're going to get a fix right away. If we're on our own, not going to happen. If there's no internet, we can use a cell modem. We see that a lot in college universities as well as affordable housing. It might not be internet, so we just switch to a cell modem. And on the left side, you see two versions of the device, one for single channel pulse counting and one for dual channel. And at the bottom, we can also read encoded register meters, which is a different type of meter used commonly. But either way, you're kind of covered with the meters. So once the data gets to our gateway, we talked about how do you do it for billing. So most clients use what we call third-party billing companies called RBCs, Read, Bill, and Collect. Today, we service over 40 of these major companies around the country, companies like Conservice, RealPage, Yardi, some of the larger ones. But there's a whole host of them. You got the small guys, individual ones throughout the country that are either just do a couple states or stay in a region, and then you got some mid-tier people that are doing, maybe nationwide or in the eastern region, and then you got big national players. So most companies use them. At any time, the data can flow to one of those companies, and if they decide, the ownership decides to change who they want it to go to, easy, pointing in a different direction. There is the opportunity if the owner wants to do their own billing, and in that case, the data can be sent to them through some kind of either just to their own software package, or if they have Excel in a way they can prepare the bills. A little complicated to do your own billing, but it is an opportunity. Obviously, if you're using a third party, there's a charge, a couple bucks a month per apartment to do that from the billing companies. But lots of options for the data and how to get it to work. It's where you need it. One point I also want to show that, besides the billing aspect, you also get lead points. So if you're doing a new building or major renovation, there's lots of lead points to get you, accreditation from the United States Green Building Council. And those points can either be on the water, which is WE, is water efficiency, or you can get credits on really the energy, electric side, the thermostat side. Those are called EA credits, energy and atmospheric credits. Both all related to submetering in some way, either for the actual monitoring and usage or for the reporting and the alarms. Lots of different points available. Just keep that in mind if you're worried about going for lead points. It might be a nice low-cost way to get some lead points and make your building green and more marketable. Obviously, is one of the goals here. So with that, let's take a second. If anybody's got a question, either on the line or through chat, I'd be happy to answer that. Excuse me. All right. Hopefully we're giving you information at the right pace that you need. All right, we're going to go ahead and switch to the next slide here. We're going to start talking about leak detection and flood detection, really kind of the next stage. We talked about billing first. Now we're talking about properties that are doing billing but also want to look for conservation opportunities or properties where the landlord owns the building, pays for all the water, let's say, and wants to now find ways that he can conserve water, he or she can conserve water in their property. Since there's no real motivation on the tenant side, all this savings comes back to them. All right. So when you look at fixtures, the toilet is the biggest area problem. Right? 40% of the uses, like we mentioned before, excuse me, but 70% of leaks come from toilets. Huge number. So that's really where we tend to focus. If you have a limited budget, always start with the toilets, and then you can worry about other areas. You can see the other areas, the kitchen sink, the bath sink, not much, right? Not much of usage, let alone much of the leaks are coming from there. You know, we all grew up and our mom told us to turn off the water when we were brushing our teeth. Mom, this is the first time you got it wrong, right? Not a lot being done on the water side in the toilets, right? In the sink in the bathroom. It's really the biggest issue is really coming in at the toilet level. So when we talk about toilets, you might have a problem with the flapper, right? When you're just hearing that noise, constantly flushing. Maybe the chain's stuck. Maybe you have a cracked fill valve. Lots of things that can go wrong in a toilet, and we have monitoring devices that can capture all of that. One of the areas when you're looking at a property to see if it's leaking or being overusage is a simple calculation called average daily consumption, ADC. And the goal here is to take a water bill for, let's say, the last 30 days, divide that bill by the number of apartments, okay, and then divide by the number of days in the month. And that'll give you your average daily consumption. The target is 70 gallons per day for one bedroom. That basically assumes two people living in an apartment. Okay. The same thing you can see from EPA for your single family homes. It's 30 gallons, 35 gallons per person. Okay. So our target is 70 gallons a day per person. The next piece says, well, what does my calculation show? And a lot of times these come back at 100 gallons average daily consumption, 130. No question, that is leaky toilets and showers. No question about it, right? When you hit 200 gallons a day, maybe it's a little beyond that. Might have leaky toilets, but now we're also starting to see kind of abuse of water. People not conserving at all. Maybe they have underground leaks or pinhole leaks in the wall. Or this is a one-bedroom apartment. We expect 2 people in there, but we really have 5 people living there. That's an indication of over-occupancy. So this is a great, simple calculation that we help customers do ahead of time in a retrofit to kind of look at the payback. How bad is your building? Let's calculate maybe what we estimate the payback to be. Very simple calculation that is easy to use. So what we look at when we're doing leaks, if you remember, we might have mentioned that with our meter, the little one that goes on each point or each toilet, it not only measures gallons, but it also measures what we call number of events, as well as how much time. So how much time has water been running, how many events, every time water stops, starts is an event, every time a toilet flushes is an event, along with gallons. We're getting a lot more information than you get from a standard pulse output meter, which just gives you gallons. So through the software, we can take the gallons, we can take the number of events, and we can calculate how much gallons per event, how many events, how much time, and we look for anomalies. And we're going to create a report for that. So a typical day in a one-bedroom apartment is 10 events for a toilet, 10 flushes a day. Pretty simple, and each flush we expect to be 1.5 gallons. Well, sometimes we'll see 2 events where water's just constantly flowing. Right? Hundreds of gallons per event. Water just never shut off, or maybe someone came in, jiggled the chain a little bit, and then it kept going again. So we know that's a leak, and we identify that as a leak of a lot of usage, and it might be a broken fill valve or the chain stuck. And then the other, which is probably more common, is where you see 100 events a day, right? Again, our target was 10 at 1.5 gallons. Now we're seeing 100 events, but each event is only 0.3 gallons. very little bit of water constantly flowing. And that's, again, your flapper valve going shh, shh, shh. That gets reported as a separate event, as a separate leak. Then you get the harder ones. I see 20 events, 1.5 gallons. Well, that's not a leak. That's the toilet went 20 times. We had a party that night. Maybe we had a bad burrito the night before. I don't know. Don't need to know. But if you see it for a week straight, 20 events, 2 weeks straight, that's a different indication. That's an indication of over occupancy. That is telling me that there's more than 2 people living there. Right? I might have grandma, grandpa, and 2 cousins living in one apartment, or college students where they rented it to 2 people, but they got 4 people hanging out there. So in that case, if it's a constant area, we've seen property managers go in and say, hey, we're here about the leak, and they determine that there's over occupancy, lots of beds on the floor. So it's kind of a good foreshadow of what's going on in that property. So these are some of the leak report type of indications we can get. Reporting comes out in a few ways. There's always daily leak reports that can come out. Maintenance manager is not going to want to know every time there's a broken flapper, send them a text or email. That's overkill. So we'll do that on a daily basis with a reporting function. And anytime they can go to the web portal, to our website, and they have a password protected section that they can go into and see their own reports at any time. And it can be, again, emailed or text to specific people based on whatever the ownership wants to set up. So a nice, clean reporting system.
Hi, this is Terry Armstrong from H2O Degree. I just wanted to let everyone know, I think Don may have had a slight issue with connection, but he'll be back very shortly. I think GoToMeeting had closed him out for whatever reason, but we can still continue on with this here momentarily, just a minute or 2.
Okay.
And it looks like, Rika, you had a question. What if the billing is water and sewage combined? So we can, so, that would be charges that you can actually bill back to the resident. So depending on how your sewage is calculated in your territory, whether it's a flat fee, if it's a per unit charge, and that kind of depends on the township or municipality that you're in, or whether it's usage related, if it's directly proportional to the gallons consumed at the property. If you consumed 1,000 gallons of water, are you going to be charged 1,000 units for sewer? But those are charges that you would be able to bill back to the resident. And ultimately, you have that option, right? And I was mentioning to you there in chat, we can run a return on investment to explain to you, how billing back the sewer as well would affect that return on investment. So whether it's flat fee or directly relational to the usage, you're able to do that. And then you had a second question there. Can you detect when? Well, let me step back. Does that kind of answer your question for water and sewage?
Yes.
Okay. And then you said, can you detect when some apartments do not get hot water in a reasonable amount of time? Some claim that they have to wait 2 to 5 minutes. We actually do have that capability. So Don had showed everyone the point of use dial meter that we have that would go on individual fixtures. That meter has a couple different what we call registers that it provides. So we capture gallons on that meter, total flow time, the events, which are stops and starts of the water, and also temperature. So as water flows through that flow sensor, we can detect what temperature it's at. And if you wanted to, let's say, bill back the energy used to create that hot water, since it may be a central domestic hot water system, we would start computing therms or BTUs. That's just a measurement of energy when the temperature of the water is above 90 degrees. And so that's where we start to say, okay, they're starting to get delivered hot water. And, typical reasons why residents may have to run water, or they say that it takes a long time for them to receive water, would be the plumbing configuration inside the building if there's no hot water return lines. So
Yeah,
that's where you have
yeah,
a longer time.
We have, 11 apartments on a six-floor multifamily building, and it's only one line that doesn't get it. They have to wait like 5 minutes or 3 minutes for the hot water. The rest of us are okay. So that can be detected why, or that's a plumbing issue.
So that would be a little bit more of a plumbing issue, but we would be able to give you the data to say, here is how many gallons that they had to flow through their meter until they started to receive hot water.
Okay.
So there now are, there are products out in the market. One of the products, we have a good relationship with the manufacturer. We've done some different OEM things with them that would help provide hot water in a more reasonable amount of time. So if there's not a return line that's essentially installed at the apartment where hot water is kind of recirculated on a continuous basis, you can put in a system underneath the sink, and that sink would then push hot water through the domestic hot side into the cold side, and so essentially make the cold water pushing back down to the boiler into a makeshift return, right? And it would do that every so often if the temperature of the water wasn't at the reasonable temperature where, everybody considers hot water, right? And that's usually above 100 degrees.
Okay, you kind of lost me, but that's okay. I just wondered, what can be done about that, and I will pursue it and try to study it better.
Yeah, no, and that's okay. I'll send you a message here in the chat feature, and I'll give you my email address, and then I can send you a link for what that product is, and then we can kind of discuss on the other features that our meters can provide, especially if you're looking to meter individual residents. So I'll go ahead and send you my email address, and we can discuss that a little further offline.
Thank you.
Hello, Jerry.
Okay, everyone, this is Susie. I just spoke to Don. He cannot log back in. So if you give me 1 second here, I have a copy of the presentation, and Jerry can finish going through it with us. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yes, Susie.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Yep.
Hey guys, it's Don. I'm on the line,
good.
but I don't have control of the slides, so you'll have to tell me what slide. I don't know what happened there.
Okay, give
Sorry
me 1
about
second here.
I'm still at the daily leak detection report slide.
Okay, 1 second.
Oops.
And I think, Daniel, you may have started with a question.
Yes, thank you. A couple questions on the people that do the billing, like Yardi. If the tenant doesn't pay, are there any remedies that who's responsible if the utility company is not getting paid? That's question one. Question two is, are you going to talk about the return on investment and the cost of installing your devices? And the third question has to do with steam heat. I own a building in New York with steam heat, and there's a huge opportunity here which is not being addressed.
What do you mean?
Jerry, do you want?
Yeah. Sorry.
So I can jump in. You guys can hear me, okay? All right. Sorry about that. Milstein.
Yep, go ahead.
So let's start with your first question. Who's responsible if someone doesn't pay? There's no question. That is usually typically a negotiation with the property manager and the RBC as to, are they going to pay for, remember, they're called RBC, read, bill, and collect. So they're all going to do reading and billing. The collection piece is usually a determination. Does the owner want to be collecting the money from the tenant and having the money go directly to them? Or sometimes they'll say, no, you, Mr. Meter Reading Company, you're going to collect the money. I might actually have you even pay the water utility each month, and you have to worry about the receivable collection. Or you try to collect it for 60 days, and then it goes back to the property manager, that then has a little more influence over the tenants. So typically, it's ultimately going to become the property manager's, I guess, ultimate responsibility, but could facilitate it through the RBC to pay the money, to collect the money from the tenants and pay the utility. But ultimately, the property manager is responsible. It's not the tenants. The utility is saying, all I know is that property, you're the owner of it, you owe me the money, not each individual tenant. That makes sense?
Yeah, I could see this becoming a headache. And I had one building in New Hampshire where I was sub-billing my tenants for hydronic heat, and the owner's responsibility was on me to generate the bills, and I just didn't have the time. So my latest iteration on this is I'm just going to include the heat and the rent and walk away from it. It's just too much aggravation.
Sure. Yeah, but I got to tell you, I mean, if you look across the country, most people are doing it this way, where they're billing the tenants, and a lot of times they want it separate from the rent roll, from the rent being paid. This way, if someone's not paying the water bill, they're paying the rent, and vice versa. So a lot of times they keep it separate. And in a lot of cases, there's this concept that the landlord and tenant relationship might not always be the greatest. So let's keep the utility billing separate. But I think you find pretty much if they're paying the rent, they're paying the utilities at the same time. And it's built into the contract or lease that they have to. Right? So that was, I think, your first and maybe second question. I know you
Second
asked
question
about.
was, what are you going to address the cost of and the return on investment for
Sure.
landlords that want to install your system?
Yep. So we'll do that at a high level. This is a good spot as any. If you're doing it for tenant billing, right? If you think about each meter point is about $200 per point, right? For the meters, for the wireless communication, for everything in. And what that turns out, if it's new construction or retrofit, if it's a single point of entry, 1 meter per apartment, that's easily a year or less payback for tenant billing. Taking 100% of the bills, turning over to the tenant. If you're looking at it from a basis of dual channel, dual point, might be a little bit over a year, but not much. When you get to point of use, then that's $500 per apartment, maybe a little more. And now you're looking at closer to a 3-year payback for tenant billing. When you look at it from a leak detection standpoint, where I'm paying 100% of the bill and now I want to conserve, in that situation, you're now looking at closer to anywhere from 6 months, because maybe you're leaking like a sieve, to 3-4 years. It really depends. And that's part of that average daily consumption analysis, helps determine what kind of savings will be and what the payback will be. But I'd say on average for tenant billing, it's usually a year payback, and for leak detection, somewhere in that 2 to 3 year range would be in general. Any follow-up to that?
Question was about steam.
Yeah, so steam, we're going to show you on a slide or two later what we're doing for thermostats, and we'll bring up steam. At this point, our system really is not working on steam, but we're using it for hydronic heat or electric baseboard heat. And today, right now, there's really no technology out there that can handle steam for controlling it. So at this point, steam is not being treated. It is the holy grail, at least for us in the Northeast, to see if we can go after the New York market. And we are looking at some technology that uses everything else that we're using for wireless and for thermostats, just need a different valve to work on the steam heater. So once we get through that other section, might help.
In your product offering, you show a point of use steam valve that goes in the radiator.
Right, that's for hydronic radiators with hot water, not steam.
It looks like a steam radiator valve. So
yeah, it looks the same, but it's not. It's a
hydronic
it looks the same. Yeah, looks the same, but it's not. And we actually have a picture here. So, all right. So if everyone's good, I mean, let's just keep going to the next couple slides. So flood detection. Now we're talking about water on the floor. Right? So before we're talking about down the toilet sink, now we're saying, hey, hot water heater has a leak, washing machine hose came off. you put this sensor, which at the top of it has two metal, really a plastic piece on a wire. Underneath that plastic piece are two little sensors that measure water. As soon as the water measures that there's water on the floor, it sends a signal back to the bigger part of that plastic, which has a radio in it. Instantly goes back to the cloud wirelessly, and now we say, hey, we got water on the floor leaking. And at that point, we can go ahead and send a text message to the property manager or to the tenant or whoever, the maintenance person, whoever we've identified through the ownership, to say, I have water on the floor, we got a major problem, right? So that's what happens there. That's a water sensor on the floor sending out a signal. The next slide uses what's called a rope sensor. And this is where I want to do a little bit bigger area, right? So if I put that sensor near a hot water heater, the first one, well, what if the water goes to the left instead of the right? I don't catch it. This rope sensor is typically about 10 feet. I can put it all the way around the hot water heater. Or I can wrap it around a pipe in the wall or right where the water comes in, or put it all around the washing machine. Okay, I cover a much larger area. Again, sends a signal that I have a leak, and now I can go figure out how I want to deal with that. So then you go to the next level, which is the next slide that talks about, okay, I got this leak. Now I got to make a decision. Do I just send a text message to someone to turn it off? In these type of situations, you might be able to even tie in, make a phone call to a tenant to see if there's something wrong there. Or you can check an occupancy sensor that shows if someone's been there in the last 5 minutes. Maybe they kicked over a bucket of water. You look at all those factors first, or depending on how the property manager wants to do it, you can send a signal right to what we call a remote shutoff device. And this device is connected either to the main water coming into the apartment at single point of entry or dual point of entry, or let's say it's on the hot water heater, could be on a wash machine. That gets a signal that there's water on the floor, and that signal automatically through the cloud says, turn it off, and it shuts it off. So we stop the water instantaneously. So we have flood detection on the floor. We make algorithms decide, do we just turn it off, or do we want to contact some people first? And either way, we're going to go and shut it off. And this prevents that damage. And it's never the guy on the third floor that gets killed. His carpet gets wet, the people below him, where the water goes down into.
I have a quick question. I see
Sure.
that's TACO. So you're partnering with other companies like TACO to provide a solution?
Yeah, we have a couple different solutions. One is the TACO valve that can be used on Wi-Fi or just a hard wire. And then we have another one that's on the left that's using our LoRa wireless, so we can tie the whole system in. So we always want to be flexible depending on the application to pick the best result. But the key is the communication, right? To be able to do it remotely and have it go through the system to determine, do we just shut it off or send a text first. So that's the remote shut off. Go to the next one. The next slide talks about any questions. We're live here, so if anybody has any, I cannot see the chat questions. So Susie or Jerry, if there's any chat questions. If not, we'll
Can
got
you
a couple more slides.
can you walk us
There's no
through
new
it?
questions. Go ahead.
What I do. I have a question. How
Sure,
does
please.
it? What if our billing is interested in your service? What's the walkthrough? Can you give us a walkthrough?
Sure.
Do we pay for your coming as a consultant, and then you give us a report? And how is it done?
Yeah. So how we work it is we have we're headquartered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we have our staff there, but we have sales reps throughout the country. So we have about 15 sales agencies throughout the country. Basically in New England, we have another group for New York, Manhattan. We have another group for Philadelphia, Florida, the Californias, throughout the country. And what we do is we can either, if we have a rep there locally, they'll just come over, talk to you about your property, do a job walk website, no charge for that, and do a calculation of the payback, just like that average daily consumption. We get some water bills from you for that. If we're in an area that maybe we can't get someone there in a timely fashion or it's too far, in that case, a lot of times we'll do it by phone. We do a WebEx like this or a telephone call, understand what your usage is. If you have drawings for the building, a lot of times we'll just go through the drawings and lay out what the bill of material would be, or we go on Google Earth and figure out what size property is where it's located. And then ultimately, if it's a retrofit, the ideal thing for us is talk to the maintenance person that's been there more than a year. And that gives us a good understanding of how the building is. So most of this we can do remote, but we try to get a person in front of you as best as possible. No cost for any of that analysis and site visits. And from there, you get a bill of material and you can get a investment analysis done at no cost. And you then have a discussion and help you decide what you want to do, what direction. We can make introductions to meter reading companies if you want to do it for billing and bring them in also at the same time. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Good. Sure.
Quick question before you go on. Your leak detection, does that go through the 900 megahertz portal?
Yes. Same thing. All this goes through the same 900 megahertz portal with reporting out. Same thing. So you can do billing, you can do leak detection, you can do the thermostat controls, which we'll talk about briefly here, all through the same system. So if everyone gives me another 5-7 minutes, I appreciate it, or a little less than that, just to go through the thermostat real quick, and then we'll talk about a couple of jobs, and we're done. And I appreciate everyone being patient. First time in, I don't know, done 30 of these since we've been home and never had an issue, but of course you picked the right thing. Sorry about that. So get to the next slide. We'll talk about the thermostat. In this case, typically it's found when the owner is paying all the bills and wants to give the tenants the thermostat that they can push the buttons and control, but the owner in the background, you know, we give them the software and show them how to do it, or we can do it for you. It doesn't matter. We'll set the thermostat that it doesn't go above 74 degrees and doesn't go below 68. And 10 o'clock at night, you can set it back. And you can make it where if the apartment's vacant, you can switch it from occupied mode to vacant mode, which has a whole nother setting. The key is, as the owner, you're able to control every thermostat, see every thermostat on the computer, see what the temperature is in the apartment. So when Mrs. Smith calls up and says, I'm too cold, and you say, well, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, the apartment's 72 degrees. I'd like to recommend you put a sweater on. You're doing it with some good guidance and information. Okay. The same thing in a college environment. It's used a lot there because there's constantly changes in the living arrangement. We put it in normal student mode, and then all of a sudden you have where the students are on spring break or winter break, and it switches to a different setting. Then comes summertime, another setting. Same thing as you do with a vacant apartment. We know there's different settings for each type that we want to operate under. The key here is it's not like a Nest thermostat, which is one-to-one. This allows you to see every thermostat, control them all at the same time, raise them all up and down individually or collectively. You know, you could say, I want to lower every thermostat 1 degree right now. Bang, go into software, happens 7 seconds later. All right? Same way, if you just want to adjust one apartment, you can. It also helps you with maintenance issues. It's 30 degrees outside. I've been calling for heat all day, and I can see the apartment never got above 50 degrees. I got a problem with the heater. Or maybe the tenant's got the window open. Right? So it's kind of both a control tool as well as just like we're looking for leaks, we're looking for wasted energy or problems with the thermostat system.
2 quick questions. Do you have motion sensors like Nest and Ecobee?
So yes, we have a motion sensor that works on the 900 megahertz LoRaWAN. That's where I was talking about before. We could actually go to the motion sensor first to see if someone kicked over a bucket of water, right, before we went and shut it off. So you can incorporate that as part of the system.
And I can assume you can lock out remote interaction with the thermostat so it can just be controlled centrally.
Yes. What we found, though, is if you want to reduce the number of complaints, give them some control. Right? Give them that band of 74 to 68 that can go within. And if you give people no control, they get upset. But that's purely up to you. We're just giving you best practice for 20 years doing this kind of stuff. It's like going to your hotel room, and if you hit that button 10 times and it doesn't change the temperature, what do? You call on the phone. If it goes up 2 degrees, you're like, okay, I guess I'm comfortable. Same concept. Get to the next slide. And this slide is just going to show you that you can see every apartment. You can set the settings for each apartment. You can go through different temperatures. Just, really gives you a good view of the property. And then on the next slide, we're going to show that hydronic system. So our thermostat system can work with additional fan coil type heating systems, can work with hydronic systems, can work with electric baseboard heaters. Here we're showing a hydronic system where we're controlling the water flow and monitoring it for usage to see how much it's been running and how much water is being used and really the run time for the heat to bill. So we're going to control it and bill it. And this is the same system we're looking to see if we can develop a valve and sensor that would work for steam. We're not quite there yet. The next slide really just talks about, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, that goes water, electric, gas, BTU meters. So everything we just talked about for water can be done with any of these other utilities. You can put a single water electric meter in each apartment, or you can put it in the electric panel in the hallway. Either way you can do it. So you have lots of options for electric. Gas is not as much application, but we do find gas used both for tenant billing, but most of the time we see a lot of gas for either the boiler room where we want to monitor how much gas each boiler is using, or maybe there's some commercial tenants on the first floor and you want, it's a restaurant or something like that. You want to put in a water or electric gas along with the tenant meters in each apartment. All right. So just flip to, you don't have to stop for questions unless someone's got one. Any questions, anyone? All right. Just going to wrap up here with a couple slides to give you, just reality, right? This is New York, in Queens, New York, a little outside Manhattan. It's a 4,600 unit property, one of the larger residential properties in the country. It's called the Frac City. Built in, I'm not exactly sure, in the 50s, 60s, so this is definitely a retrofit opportunity. And what they wanted to do was to go ahead and meter each tenant. And in this case, they used point of use meters because they had those risers where the toilets were on one riser, showers and kitchen were on another set of risers. So on average, there's 3 to 4 meters in each apartment, maybe 5, depending on the size apartment, retrofitted. And now what they're doing is, as the lease changes, as tenants move out, which pretty much about 20% move out every year, they are going ahead, giving them a new lease, which says you're now paying for water. Okay? So this is a traditional retrofit point of use type of situation, big property. What they did interesting here is they wired everything up for the wireless communication, put all that infrastructure in, and now as the tenants move out, they drop into meters, and they're all set for that. All right, the next slide. We'll talk about a property in San Diego. This was brand new construction, 20-some stories, 24-story property, 220 apartments. In this case, they had dual point of entry, so they had an essentially heated water system. So they brought one hot pipe, one cold pipe to each apartment. Put 2 meters, pulse output back to one LARA gateway, and it covered the whole building. This was done a couple of years ago, and it was mainly driven, they knew this was the right thing to do from a market standpoint, and to be competitive in the market, to be able to offer to their tenants the ability to have their rent plus utilities. That was kind of where the market was going. And you also were in compliance with that California Senate Bill 7 requirement. This was, again, a large real estate investment trust called Lennar Multifamily Communities. Very successful project. The next one we'll show you is really a typical garden style. 188 units. This is outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Single point of entry. So they had a hot water heater in each apartment, 1 meter for each apartment, tied to a wireless gateway that was in the clubhouse in the center of the property, and it covered the whole property. So this property is about 30, 40 acres throughout, and 1 gateway covered everything. So this one, that kind of shows you 3 or 4 different types of buildings, and we have these throughout the U.S. So with that, first of all, I want to apologize for a technical snafu there, but hopefully we got you back on track. Appreciate everyone hanging in there. Any last questions or comments from anyone? We will get you this copy of this presentation along with your lunch from Uber Eats or Grubhub or however you decided to order today. So let me know. Any questions, comments?
No, thank you very much. Very informative.
All right. Appreciate you taking the time. We'll stay on for a minute or two. If anyone's got a question, go ahead. If not, enjoy the rest of your day, and let's be safe out there. Thank you very much.
If we want to talk to you individually, who should we talk to?
So you can call myself, or you can call our main number and ask for Jerry Armstrong. So Don Milstein or Jerry Armstrong both were on this call and would be happy to talk to you. Jerry handles New York, so his extension is 115. Yeah.
And I'll
Jerry,
send you my cell phone number as well. The office number is 215-788-8485. My direct extension is 115. My cell phone number is 267-816-7268. And I'll go ahead and message you in the chat by email address as well.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy lunch. Thank you very much for your time.